In June 2014, Derek and Maria Broaddus had just bought their dream home in Westfield, New Jersey, a 6-bedroom house on a quiet suburban street. It was the kind of place they had worked their whole lives for, a safe neighborhood to raise their children. But just days after closing the sale, before they even moved in, a letter arrived in the mailbox. It was handwritten in thick, blocky letters, addressed simply to the new owner. The letter began innocently enough, welcoming them to the neighborhood, but it quickly turned disturbing. 657 Boulevard has been the subject of my family for decades now, it read. I have been put in charge of watching and waiting for its second coming. My grandfather watched the house in the 1920s, and my father watched it in the 1960s. It is now my time. The writer knew things about the Broaddus family no one should have. He referenced their car, their children by nickname, even renovations they had only recently begun inside the house. I see already that you have flooded 657 Boulevard with contractors so that you can destroy the house as it was supposed to be, the letter said. You don't want to make 657 Boulevard unhappy. Derek was understandably shaken. He called the police, who told him not to tell anyone about the letters, not even the neighbors, as they began an investigation. But more letters came. In the second letter, the writer asked if the new owners had found what was in the walls yet, hinting at secrets hidden deep within the house. I am pleased to know your names now, he wrote, and the name of the young blood you have brought to me. The Broadduses became terrified. They never moved in. Instead, they installed security cameras, hired a private investigator, and even consulted a former FBI agent. No leads ever turned up. The letters were untraceable. No fingerprints, no saliva, no digital evidence. Every neighbor became a suspect. The Broadduses became consumed by fear, paranoia, and regret. Eventually, after years of failed attempts to sell the home and public scrutiny when the story went viral, the family sold the house at a loss. They never lived there. To this day, the identity of the Watcher remains a mystery. No one knows who wrote the letters or why. The current owners of the house have not received any further correspondence, perhaps because the Watcher only wanted the Broaddus family, or perhaps because he knew his time was up. What remains most chilling is the letter's final line. Let the young blood play again like I once did. Stop changing it and let it alone. Watch and wait. I will be patient. And he signed it simply, The Watcher. It was the summer of 1986 in a quiet suburb of Chicago. Annie, a 14-year-old girl, was home alone for the weekend. Her parents had gone to visit relatives, and she begged to stay behind. She was responsible, mature, and not easily spooked. They trusted her. Friday night was uneventful. She microwaved some pizza, watched TV, and fell asleep on the couch. Around 2 a.m. she woke to a strange sound, a soft tapping. Tap, tap, tap. At first, she thought it was the branches outside scraping the window, but when she turned off the TV, she heard it again, clearer this time. Tap, tap, tap. It was deliberate, rhythmic. She got up and walked toward the front window, peeking out through the blinds. A man was standing in her yard. Not walking, not moving, just standing there. He was tall, wearing a dark coat despite the heat, and had shaggy hair that half covered his face. He was facing the house, not the street, not pacing or looking lost, just staring. She gasped and dropped the blinds. Her heart was racing. She ran to the kitchen, grabbed the phone, and called the police. They said a unit would be sent immediately. As she waited, she crept to another window to peek out again. He was gone. The police arrived 10 minutes later, searched the yard, the street, even behind the house. Nothing. No footprints, no signs of forced entry. They told her it was probably just a local drunk or a teenager playing a prank. They offered to have an officer do a drive-by later in the night. Annie agreed. Shaken, but trying to calm down, she went back inside and double-checked all the locks. Then she went upstairs to bed. Around 4 a.m. she woke again. This time it wasn't tapping, it was whispering. Faint, almost inaudible, like someone murmuring to themselves right outside the window. She was on the second floor. Panicking, she crawled to the window and slowly peeked out from behind the curtain. There he was. The same man, standing on the roof of the front porch just feet away from her window. His lips were moving, whispering something she couldn't hear. His eyes, cold and blank, never left hers. She screamed and ducked away from the window, grabbing the phone again, but the line was dead. This time, she didn't wait. She grabbed her keys and bolted out the back door to a neighbor's house, banging on the door until they woke up. The police were called again. By the time they arrived, the man was gone. No signs of entry, no footprints on the porch roof. Nothing. Years later, Annie discovered something chilling. A man had been arrested just a few blocks from her neighborhood that same summer for breaking into homes and watching young girls sleep. He would sometimes spend hours just standing outside their windows. Annie never stayed home alone again, and she never forgot that face in the window, watching her.
In 2008, 28-year-old Charles Peck was on a Metrolink train headed to Los Angeles when disaster struck. The train collided head-on with a freight train in one of the deadliest rail accidents in California history. Over 130 people were injured and 25 died, including Charles. But here's where it becomes terrifying. For 11 hours after the crash, Charles's phone kept calling his family members. His fiancée, Andrea, received several calls, so did his son, his stepmother, his sister, and his brother. In total, 35 calls came from Charles's phone between the time of the crash and the time his body was found. Every time someone picked up, there was only static or silence. When they tried to call back, it would go straight to voicemail. Desperate and confused, his loved ones clung to hope. Maybe he was trapped in the wreckage. Maybe he was alive, reaching out, unable to speak. They gave the phone information to rescue teams, who used it to try to triangulate his location within the debris. The calls gave them hope. They believed Charles was alive, fighting to survive, trying to connect. Then, suddenly, the calls stopped. Hours later, rescue workers found Charles's body. He had died on impact. That meant all those calls happened after he was already dead. Even more disturbing, the phone was never recovered. Authorities never found it in the wreckage. There was no explanation for the calls, no way to trace them, no logical reason why a dead man's phone, crushed in a destroyed train, would keep contacting his family. Some experts suggested a glitch or a damaged battery misfiring signals. But 35 calls placed to multiple people over 11 hours? That's no ordinary malfunction. His family believes it was Charles. One last attempt to say goodbye. One final push through whatever veil separates this world from the next. A farewell from beyond the grave. But others believe something different, something darker. They say tragedies like this leave a mark. The trauma and suddenness of death can stir up energy, attract things we don't understand. Some say the calls weren't from Charles at all, but from something else that latched on to the chaos and grief of that moment, something using his number as a way in. A few even claim the calls continued after Charles's funeral. His fiancée reportedly received a final missed call from his number 2 days after he was laid to rest. She didn't answer. She couldn't bear to. When she called back, it rang once and then went silent. No more calls came after that. What happened with Charles Peck's phone has never been explained. The incident has been examined in paranormal documentaries and remains one of the eeriest and most well-documented cases of possible post-mortem communication. And even now, if you search the crash records or speak to those who knew him, one detail always sends chills. The phone stopped calling the moment they found his body. In 2012, a woman named Sarah moved into a quiet suburban neighborhood. For months, everything seemed normal until strange things began happening. Doors she was sure she'd locked were found open. Objects in her house were moved or missing. She brushed it off as forgetfulness, but the feeling of being watched never left.
One night, Sarah woke to the sound of breathing, soft but close. Her bedroom window was cracked open. The next morning, the police found footprints in the garden leading to her house. She installed security cameras. Weeks later, reviewing the footage, Sarah saw a shadowy figure lurking outside her window, watching her every move. The police traced the prints and discovered a man living in the abandoned house down the street. He had been secretly entering her home at night, living there when she was away or asleep, too terrified to confront him. The intruder was arrested, but the fear lingered. Sarah moved away soon after.
In 2014, a small family moved into a modest house on the edge of a quiet town in New Jersey. The house was charming, nestled right beside a dense wooded area. The parents, Mark and Lisa, thought it was the perfect place to raise their two children, Jake, 10, and Emily, 7. Almost immediately after moving in, strange things started happening. At first, it was little things. Footsteps outside when no one was there, the sound of someone breathing near the windows late at night, and the feeling of being watched. Lisa shrugged it off as her imagination, and Mark chalked it up to the new environment settling in. One evening, Lisa was tucking Emily into bed when the little girl looked out her window toward the woods and said, "Mommy, the man is still there." Lisa was confused. "What man, sweetie?" Emily pointed quietly. "That man, standing behind the trees." Lisa glanced but saw nothing but shadows. Over the next few weeks, the sightings became more frequent. Jake swore he saw a figure standing silently at the edge of the woods while playing outside. Sometimes the figure would disappear when the children called out to it. Other times it just watched, unmoving. Mark finally decided to investigate. He installed cameras pointing into the woods from their backyard. For several nights, nothing unusual showed up. Until the third night. When reviewing footage, Mark and Lisa saw a dark figure standing at the tree line. The figure didn't move, just watched the house, its eyes faintly reflecting the camera's infrared light. Terrified, Mark shared the footage with neighbors, but no one reported seeing anything similar. Still, Mark called the local police to check the area. They found nothing unusual and assured the family there was no threat. The police officer even joked, "Maybe it's just a hunter or someone camping out." But then things escalated. One night, while the family was asleep, Emily woke up screaming. Lisa rushed to her room to find the window wide open. The lock had been forced. On the floor near the window was a single footprint, much larger than any family member's shoe size. The family called the police immediately. That night, the officers stayed at the house, watching. They found nothing. No intruder, no signs of forced entry elsewhere, but the unease remained. Mark and Lisa began to research the history of their property. They discovered that decades earlier, a man had lived alone in a cabin deep in those very woods. He was known locally as the Watcher. The man had disappeared mysteriously, but neighbors often reported seeing him standing silently, watching homes from the shadows. One local told Mark, "They say he never left, that he still watches the people who live near his woods." Frightened, the family decided to move. But the night before they left, the cameras captured something new. The figure was no longer just standing. It had made what looked like a slow wave. Mark and Lisa never looked back. They left everything behind and never returned. The Watcher in the woods remains, a silent guardian or a sinister presence that haunts the edges of their old home. In the summer of 2017, 26-year-old hiker Brian Laundrie set out on a solo trip to hike a remote section of the Appalachian Trail in Pennsylvania. He was experienced, prepared, and eager for a few days of solitude in the wilderness. What happened next remains a chilling mystery. Brian was last seen by a park ranger near the trailhead, who noted he seemed in good spirits and well-equipped. But after 3 days, Brian didn't show up at the planned checkpoint where his friend was supposed to meet him. His friend reported him missing.
Search and rescue teams were dispatched immediately. They combed through miles of thick forest, calling Brian's name and scanning for signs of a campsite or trail markers. They found his backpack near a small creek, untouched but surrounded by footprints. Some were Brian's, but others were larger and didn't match any known hikers. A few days later, a local hunter found Brian's cell phone in a hollow tree about 2 miles off the trail. It was cracked, but still functional. The phone had several recent photos, but the last image was disturbing. A blurry, shadowy figure standing just behind Brian, barely visible in the low light. Authorities investigated the area thoroughly but found no clues. No sign of Brian, no evidence of foul play, and no indication that he had left the woods. Theories ran wild. Had he been attacked by a wild animal? Had he gotten lost and succumbed to the elements? Or was something more sinister at work? Weeks passed, and Brian's disappearance remained unsolved. Then, a hunter discovered a shallow grave deep in the woods, but it was empty. Nearby were strange symbols scratched into tree bark, unlike anything the searchers had seen before, symbols that local legends associated with old cult rituals. The mystery remains unsolved, but locals avoid that part of the Appalachian Trail now, saying the forest takes what it wants and doesn't give it back. Brian Laundrie's disappearance became a cautionary tale about the dangers lurking in the wild, dangers unseen and unfathomable. In 2006, a young woman named Samantha moved into a small apartment in Chicago. It was old, but affordable, with creaky wooden floors, antique fixtures, and a large wall-mounted mirror in the hallway. The previous tenant had left the mirror behind, and though it looked vintage and beautiful, something about it unsettled Samantha from the beginning. She brushed it off as nerves about living alone for the first time. But soon, odd things began happening. The temperature in the hallway near the mirror was always colder than the rest of the apartment, no matter the season. At night, she heard faint tapping sounds coming from the hallway, even when no one was there. One night, around 2 a.m., Samantha got up to use the bathroom. As she passed the mirror, she caught a glimpse of something that stopped her in her tracks. Her reflection was delayed, just for a second, but enough to notice. Her own face seemed off. The eyes looked more sunken, the smile wider. She stared, heart pounding, but the reflection returned to normal. Thinking she was just overtired, she went back to bed. But after that, the hallway became a source of anxiety. Every time she walked past the mirror, she avoided looking at it. It felt like something inside it was watching her. 3 weeks later, a friend named Lauren came to visit. As they sat on the couch catching up, Lauren glanced toward the mirror and froze. "Why do you have someone standing in your hallway?" she asked. Samantha's blood ran cold. She turned immediately. No one was there. But Lauren swore she had seen a woman in a long, dark dress standing near the mirror, her face pale and her eyes completely black. "She wasn't looking at us," Lauren said, visibly shaken. "She was watching you." That night, Samantha covered the mirror with a bedsheet, but in the early hours of the morning she awoke to the sound of the sheet sliding off. She sat up and stared at the hallway. The sheet was on the floor, and the mirror was fogged up, with a handprint on the inside. Terrified, Samantha contacted the landlord. When she explained what was happening, there was a long pause. Then the landlord said quietly, "You know, someone died in that apartment, right?" Samantha hadn't known. The previous tenant, a woman in her 40s named Clara, had died by suicide in the apartment. According to the report, she had become increasingly paranoid, claiming something was watching her from the mirror. Samantha moved out that same week. A few months later, she saw the apartment listed again, with one notable change. In the photos, the mirror was gone. But every now and then, Samantha swears she still sees that woman's face in other mirrors, just for a second, watching her from the other side.